other than getting input from the Special Assessment Commission. And so there's just no special assessments being levied today. So I think it's just important for everybody to remember that we're not asking the Special Assessment Commission to vote on any special assessments today. So, because we would, there's a specific process and procedure under the Century Code to follow before we can actually levy special assessments.
Okay, thank you, John. And again, if any public's on, as John said, we won't be taking any official action today. This is an informational meeting only, so we probably won't be taking any comments from the public today, as it's just getting information for the commission and for the public at large. So with that, Dustin, you want to give us an overview of the project and the assessment district and some thoughts on some methodologies?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and other members of the commission, and good afternoon to all those attending this meeting. So as we've reiterated here, that this is just an informational type meeting. Generally, of course, we don't start discussing and reviewing special assessments with with this particular commission until after the project's been done and the city commission has directed that process begin. However, I think everyone is aware that this is certainly a unique project, one that we've been planning on for the last couple of years. Of course, the funding has started to take shape, and we now know that roughly a couple $1 million are going to be spread with special assessments. And when it comes to a unique project like this that involves underground infrastructure replacement, as well as the street reconstruction, certainly has some challenges in determining the appropriate benefit and allocating out those special assessments. So we wanted to take this as an opportunity to share with this commission our thoughts so far. We did present to the city commission back on December 7th, when we asked them to award a contract. We did present a preliminary assessment, and so certainly want to discuss that, review that with this commission, and then also go through maybe a few other options for allocating the assessments that were considered so far. Again, nothing is being set in stone today. We just kind of want to get some feedback from this commission, and so bear with us as we present some of this, and feel free to stop me at any time, ask questions. I will also point out that our engineering consultant, More Engineering, Matt Welly, is on this meeting as well, and I might defer some of these detailed discussions over to him. Certainly, he's also available to help answer questions as well. So with that said, I'm going to, like you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go through just real brief project overview. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So once you see the screen switch over, please let me know that you are able to see what I have shared. So hopefully in the next couple seconds here.
Yes, I've got it, Dustin.
And can you confirm what you're seeing?
On mine, it says North Cheyenne Street Corridor Reconstruction Project Details.
Perfect.
Eddie and John, are you both getting that?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. So I wanted to start with our website. Generally, I like to do this, and our communications department has done a wonderful job trying to compile all of the information for this project and other projects on our website. They recently updated the North Cheyenne Street Corridor page with current information, where those in the, commissioners, the public, anybody can go through and see more detailed information is available. So without reading through everything word for word, I'm going to go right to some of the good stuff here and pull open maps that are right off this website. I'm going to start with a street layout just to familiarize the commission with the project. We have of course, been working on this over the last couple of years, and we've had some public input meetings and other public outreach opportunities. So I would hope that a lot of this information is not new for the commission, but again, it's certainly good to go through the project just so we build that basis of understanding, which of course will help then guide some discussion towards allocating the assessments. So what you see on the screen now, I hope, is the street view, proposed street layout. And on the left side of the screen, on the top left, is the north side of the project. I hope you can see my cursor. This is the intersection at Main Avenue. As you can see, the project continues south, often referred to as a road diet. The intent here is to narrow up the street in terms of the traveled lanes. So basically removing the center turn lane that is currently in place and going down to a 2-lane street section with on-street parking on the west side, as well as some on-street parking on the east side, a little further south towards the project limits. We are also taking the opportunity to redo some of these side streets. So as you see, starting especially at 3rd Avenue, and then of course at 4th, we are also adding some parking onto those side streets as well. Now coming down to the bottom half of the screen, starts on the left side here is the intersection at 4th Avenue. So right across from the new plaza, you can see here we got Cheyenne Plaza. Now moving south, which is going right on your screen, we are finally transitioning into just past 6th Avenue is where we're going to tie into the existing street section. Within our capital improvement plan, we do have the intent to reconstruct the intersection at 7th Avenue as a separate project, in which we are currently in the stages of planning. We have not taken any actionable items to the city commission, aside from the fact that it was included in the CIP that was adopted last June. So again, this is just a 1,000-foot level type overview of the surface components of the project. I'm going to go back to the website here, and right underneath the preliminary street layout, there is a preliminary utility layout. I'm going to click on that. And so what originally started as a surface project, in 2018, we received a $2.4 million grant from the state through a new program called the Urban Grant Program, which is really in line with Governor Burgum's Main Street Initiative. We were awarded that grant in 2018. We originally started with just the mindset of transforming the surface, basically focusing on that road diet concept, to continue the transformation that had started with that first redevelopment project, the Cheyenne Plaza downtown. However, in 2019, we were also in the middle of our core area infrastructure study, which pretty much wrapped up towards the end of 2019. And one of the results of that study was, the underground infrastructure along this corridor was identified to be in very critical condition, with water mains being asbestos pipe, and aging well beyond 50 years. Storm sewer lines well undersized, and again, that age certainly extending. Some of it, part of it was beyond 50 years. There's other portions that are a little newer, but still, even the newest portions of the storm sewer getting to be about that 25, 30-year range. So, and of course, if you've been in West Fargo very long, I can recall one of the worst events I've seen was back in June of 2010, where we had a pretty decent rainfall that left Cheyenne Street with about 2 feet of water on it. So just a testament to some of the undersizing and under capacity of our underground infrastructure. So towards the end of 2019, we did make a decision to revise the scope of this project from just a surface project to a full infrastructure replacement project, so that we can update this our utilities underground and not only serve the new development, but of course all of the existing neighborhood out here that relies upon that infrastructure, of course, need that replacement as well. So the job certainly did change last year. Now, over the past year, we've been working towards, narrowing down what exactly needs to be done. And as you can see on the screen here, again, the top left, starting at Main Avenue, moving to the right, is heading south. And then, of course, at about 4th Avenue is when you switch down to the bottom half of this map. And again, continuing right and heading south towards where we tie into the existing street section just south of 6th Avenue. The blue lines on the map represent the water main and some water services that are being installed. The orange lines represent the new storm sewer. And there's not much of it, but the green lines that you do see, one green line that you'll see is on 2nd Avenue. And then there is a stretch of green line down towards 6th Avenue. That is our sanitary sewer improvements that we are constructing with this project. So I think with that, I'm going to pause and just see if there's any questions on what I've shared so far in terms of what we're proposing for the improvements.
I'll start. I got a couple. The classification of Cheyenne Street now, is that an arterial or collector? It's more than just a local street, isn't it, Dustin?
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman. It is functionally classified as an arterial street. However, it does behave and function a little differently, especially now after, I believe it was in 2018 when the City Commission decided to take this portion off the truck route system. So though it's still functionally classified as a arterial roadway, and when I say that, that means it's on the state's, it's identified within the state and federally as a arterial road. It doesn't quite operate as one in that it's certainly, it's not a truck route. So we're trying to decrease speeds, improve safety, create that downtown environment with this roadway. But yes, it is still an arterial road. It's not the same as the Cheyenne Street as you get south of the interstate, where it's meant to move traffic, move high volumes of traffic at a reasonable time. This is meant to slow traffic down and be more of a destination place. So certainly a good question. I hope that answers.
Okay. And then the second question I have is, has the assessment boundaries already been established for this project?
That's a really great question. So I will move on to that. That is
okay. Well, then you can wait till we'll look at that later then. Eddie, Robin, you guys got any questions?
I think the questions I had were, or at least some of them were answered in what Dustin went over here. I was just kind of wondering about the change in the pipes, if there's any difference in the size, is going in versus what's currently there, that sort of thing. So I think you said they were larger to, handle the increased capacity, that's coming with the growth and development in the area. So.
Absolutely. And it's a good point. I'm glad you kind of brought that up, Commissioner Anderson. The pipe sizing for the storm sewer is certainly, we are increasing the storm sewer capacity. The water main, however, through our water modeling, we don't need to increase the sizing of the actual pipe. In fact, the water main on Cheyenne Street functions more as a local water main. It's not to say that, pretty much all of our water main is connected, and there is a more of a regional benefit for all of our water main. It's, kind of think of it as electricity. The more, connectivity you have, the better power supply you can provide. The actual trunk distribution line was installed under First Avenue, about a block to the east here. So when we do start thinking about, again, allocating assessments and who's, some of that's, again, the benefit, keep that in mind that even though Cheyenne Street, again, is an arterial corridor per se, some of the infrastructure here is maybe quote unquote somewhat regional. And that's part of, again, what leads to some of the challenges in trying to allocate out the assessments here, is that it's just, there's not a clear, hey, this is a transmission line that should be assessed out, throughout the, a larger area, whereas this, we're going to have some pockets here, and that's where I'll certainly be pulling up some maps to help walk through that discussion and demonstrate what I'm talking about there. So I think if we're ready, I can start moving towards that discussion.
One last question, then we'll get to that, Dustin. A construction schedule for this. Is this a project that's scheduled for next year's or a 2-year construction? What I'm getting at is, like, this project, the actual assessments won't be done till construction's done. If this is a 2-year construction project, then, we're not really looking to assess it for a couple of years yet.
Absolutely. The construction is planned all for 2021 here. Now, of course, like any other project, like most other projects, I should say, we'll have a substantial completion date of, I believe, November of 21. However, oftentimes there are some carryover work that continues into the following spring. So with that said, we likely will be talking assessments in 22, but it's it'll depend on when do we feel comfortable with having our final construction costs in order, and how soon can we start that process. So and this being a federally funded job, that does typically take a little longer. So I don't anticipate, for example, final costs in 21 and selling bonds in 21, so that we would begin in early 22. I foresee that taking place more towards the spring of 22, with assessments probably going through the certification process towards the middle or end of 2022.
Okay. So again, for the public, if there's any public watching, there will be a pretty significant time lag between, when we're having this discussion on methodology to when we actually get to certifying assessments against a property. It'll be several years before we probably get to that. Okay. Okay, Dustin, unless Robin or Eddie have any questions?
Yeah, say, Dustin, one question here before I move on. The public perception is that the additional development that we've had with commercial and apartments may be driving the need for the water main and the sewer, but I don't think that's the case. And I think you kind of alluded to that, because we're not increasing the size of the water main or sewer. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
No, great point, Commissioner Shealy. And yes, I'd love to reiterate that point, that again, we did go through a very intensive infrastructure study over the past couple of years. It concluded towards the end of 2019. I think we adopted it in early 2020, but that study was known as the Core Area Infrastructure Study. And sometimes it seems, how could we have gotten a year into planning this project as only a surface project, and then all of a sudden switch to the underground infrastructure replacement? And how did we not know that? Well, really, sometimes we do have some areas where the infrastructure is relatively old, but it can go another 20 years potentially. So really, we relied upon that study to come back, and one thing that we learned was that the infrastructure out here was not only aging, but also in rough condition. In fact, it was identified as one of the highest critical infrastructure in this core area. And again, there are several properties that rely upon this. And again, we'll get into that with these benefit maps. But yeah, it is not necessarily just to replace the infrastructure to help accommodate new development. This infrastructure was going to need to be replaced regardless of redevelopment downtown. So another way to say that is, had we not started redeveloping 5 years ago, we would still be here today with a replacement project. If anything would have been at question, if there maybe some of the surface designs might be different if we weren't redeveloping downtown, but the infrastructure would still need to be replaced. The storm sewer was old, it's undersized. The water main is old. Now again, that one's not necessarily undersized, but it needs to be replaced. And the sanitary sewer that's out here, again, it's the sanitary sewer is a little bit of a different situation. It's old and needs to be replaced, but again, there's not a lot of the sanitary that's out here is more of a, call it a regional type servicing sewer. There's not most of the buildings that are out here are served on other main lines, whereas the sewer that we're dealing with here with this project is more of a regional conveyance type line. So again, great question. And I'll say it one last time that we would be here, if not today, real soon, to replace this infrastructure regardless of the redevelopment.
Thank you.
So I think before I get into some of those benefit maps, I do want to point out the project costs and funding. It's been in the news as we did bring the bid results to the City Commission on December 7th. We did have an increase in cost, and I shouldn't say an increase in cost. There was a bit of a discrepancy between what us as engineers were estimating the cost to be versus what the contracting community told us they would build the project for. And so we certainly received some media attention on that. We got out ahead of it. We worked with our finance and administrative departments to look at funding sources so that the gap between what we were estimating and originally planning for could be financed without disrupting or changing what we had already somewhat communicated to the public on as far as what would be special assessed. And so we can see here again on the website, there's a handful of buckets here that the city has been able to reach into and help finance this project without relying so much on special assessments. And I love the pie chart here that our communications department put together. It really drives it home that you start looking at how this project is being funded, and roughly 17.4% is attributed to special assessments. Usually on other arterial type corridors or regional type projects, that's generally the opposite, where maybe 80, and I don't want to get into specific numbers because each project is different, but it is generally flipped the other way, where the majority of the project is funded with special assessments. And so I think our city commission was certainly happy moving this forward, knowing that the assessments are about as low as we can keep them. So of that though, so we've got a $10.4 million project at this time, which again, this is still an estimate. We have not started construction, and as we know, things can certainly change through the course of construction. But at this time, we are estimating a $10.4 million project. Of that, the city commission is at this point estimating that $1.8 million would be funded with the special assessments here. Again, that number doesn't get certified or established until the city commission creates a resolution directing assessments be levied, which, as we discussed a little earlier, likely will not happen until sometime in 2022. But based on this number, and I do want to point out, this is the same estimated number that was proposed back in June when we brought forward the engineer's report with the original engineer's cost estimate for the job. At that time, we were proposing $1.8 million of special assessments. And so even though the project cost has increased from, I believe at that time, we were about $6.5 million of total project. Even though the project cost has increased, the amount being levied by special assessments has remained the same. At least at this point, that's what the commission is asking us to proceed with. So, and why that's important at this stage, one thing we like to do when we do receive bids and award a contract, that this is the first time now that we will actually post a preliminary, or otherwise known as a pending assessment, to our parcels that are within this boundary that will be receiving assessments, so that residents, as they, for example, if they go to the city's website and pull up their parcel and look at their tax information, this will now show up as a pending assessment. Again, it's still estimated and it's subject to change, but we post these once we've awarded a contract. And so again, prior to posting this now, this is really why we are wanting to meet with the assessment commissioners, because again, this is really a unique project, and it's difficult to fall back to our policies that we do have in place, which again is worth noting that in 2016 we did create and adopt a formal special assessment policy, and that policy discusses things like assessing water main by a front foot, or how to treat regional versus local projects. It's still a very high level policy, but generally guides us through the majority of our projects. But again, this being such a unique situation, we have some challenges that certainly aren't like other projects. So again, I think I've been talking for a while, and it just seems like an appropriate time to pause and see if there are any questions. Okay. And if not, then what I will do is I'll move into more of that assessment stuff now and pull up the various maps that are relating to that. Okay, and I will begin. So on your screen now, you should see it's our cover sheet, our summary sheet that we presented to the City Commission on December 7th. Is that what you're seeing, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, when we asked the commission to award, the city commissioners to award a contract, we included some of the preliminary assessment information. And the reason why I'm showing it within this packet here is just so, again, U.S. commissioners and any of the viewing public are aware that this material has been publicly provided through that, again, that December 7th commission meeting. However, I will point out that even though that this preliminary assessment information was included with the city commission's packet, they did not take any formal action on this particular map that you see on the screen, and or the next page here, again, the preliminary assessment allocations. They're not necessarily taking action on this. Again, we provided it so that we can start to give have the opportunity to start at least projecting out what these preliminary assessments might look like. So really, there are a number of ways to boil down the assessments here, to look at allocating out each of the components of the project. And we got to a point where we moved this particular option forward. I do have some other options I can certainly show you, but I want to start with certainly what was presented to the City Commission, and or use this as a starting basis. Which reminds me, I really should probably also touch on the fact that back in June, when the City Commission did review the engineer's report, they did direct engineering staff to revise the preliminary assessments that we had developed at that time, so that we were not assessing out any of the street components of this project. And so when we did bring the bid results to them, as you can see here on this map, we do have our original assessment assessment boundary here, described by this black dashed line. However, all of the parcels that are between the black line and say the red lines here, you'll see that there's no color, call it east of First Street. That's because originally we created the boundary as large as we did because of the street component, but once they asked us not to special assess out any of the street costs, that really started to define or revise this boundary to a smaller area, again, because of the fact that these utilities that we are replacing are not major utility networks. So again, you know, the water main on this project is not a large trunk water main or distribution main. The sanitary sewer, although is partially regional, it's a smaller regional area. And again, the storm sewer is a smaller regional area. So, and I'm gonna get into that a little more specifically as we go through this map here. So, like I just covered, the black shaped boundary is what was originally approved by the City Commission. And just to show that in a different format, here is the district boundary map that was approved by the City Commission when they created the district. So this map here, again, proceeding under the notion that all we are going to levy out as far as special assessments are the underground components, we started looking at what areas are benefiting from these utilities. And so this map here, I'm going to focus on, if you can see off to the right here, underneath the legend, under the heading preliminary benefiting areas, there is a red boundary for the stormwater benefiting area. So this red boundary really is encapsulating the properties that have a reliance upon the storm system under Cheyenne Street. And what that means is, even though the pipe is under Cheyenne Street, their properties are draining to other pipes or swales or streets. Ultimately, their property is shedding their drainage ultimately to the pipe system underneath Cheyenne Street. So there is an identified benefit for that. Again, that is the red boundary. The blue boundary is for the water main. The water main is a little bit, again, somewhat challenging in terms of it is a local line, meaning it's not meant, again, as a transmission line, but it's meant to provide water to the adjacent properties. However, there is still some benefits beyond just a water service coming into a building. There is also the benefit of fire hydrant coverage, for example, or the fact that having more connectivity within the water network minimizes the chances of water loss or disruption. It promotes better quality, reduces aging conditions within the pipe. So again, there are some more benefits than to just having a service line into a building. And if if I could, I'm going to kind of put a pin in that so that you remember that particular discussion there. As we, when I get into some of the other options, you'll see why I was making that particular point. Then last, the sanitary sewer system is identified. And again, the benefiting area of the sanitary sewer improvements are identified with a green line here, and it's a little difficult to see, but it basically extends from Cheyenne Street over to the river. Now, I will say the cost of these improvements was provided in our, again, the estimated costs that were presented on December 7th, as you can see here on the screen. We have, roughly $650,000 of water, $160,000 of sanitary sewer, and roughly $1.4 million of storm sewer costs. And so you can see here there's not much on the sanitary sewer, but again, those particular costs were put into a spreadsheet where we could then start looking at these benefiting boundaries and allocating each of those costs accordingly over these boundary areas. So again, for example, that $160,000 of the sanitary sewer being spread over the parcels that are pretty much between the river and Cheyenne Street. So the next thing I want to show you on this map is relating back to the storm sewer, where you can see we have a light red shade and a green shading of the parcels. And that is identifying residential, for the most part, parcels versus call it multi-family or commercial parcels. Another way to say that would be we've got certain parcels that are more impervious, have more impervious coverage with their surface. So properties that have, townhomes or apartments, certainly commercial buildings that have parking lots, they have more impervious surface, which means they generate more drainage into our system versus a residential property that typically has, around anywhere from 30 to 50% impervious surfaces. And again, that changes property by property, but what we tried to do is lump them into, at this point, we're going with two categories. And so that's what we're created here, a tier 1 runoff. And it says residential, but I know that there are a couple non-residential properties included with this based on how impervious they are. You can see that as I zoomed into here, and I think these are, again, just a little more, I don't know if they're twin homes or townhomes, but again, they hit the threshold of being a little more impervious than a traditional residential property. So we use that tiered system then to distribute the storm costs a little differently. So if we have, again, $1 million worth of storm sewer cost to allocate, it goes to all of the properties within this red boundary. But then there's a factor applied, and I believe this is where I might need some help on correcting myself, but I believe it was about a 75-25% factor. So if, again, back to that $1 million example, $750,000 then is applied over these light red parcels, whereas $250,000 then over the green parcels. But again, so don't quote me on the actual numbers or even that percentage. Just try to understand that concept, that we are trying to identify two tiers to distribute that water main, or I'm sorry, that storm sewer assessment. So again, I'm going to pause and see where the commission has questions relating to this benefit map.
Okay.
Dustin, just one.
Yep, go ahead.
Just one question for me. There's that property on 7th, on the south side of that map that's in green, that's outside of the storm benefit area. It looks like it's the only red or green property that's outside of the storm benefit area. Was that supposed to be included, or was that meant to be excluded, and why?
Thanks, Commissioner Shealy. You're referring to the property just on the north side of this 7th Avenue label here?
Nope, go east there. So outside of that, yeah, well, yeah,
Oh,
I
sorry.
see that too. Yep, that one there too. Is that, it looks like a residential property there?
Yes, and I'm not exactly sure why that residential one is showing up like that. I will say the one to the west, this condo parcel, it's got a few different buildings on it where there are condos there in this peninsula. They are shaded because they are receiving a sanitary sewer assessment. Again, all the properties between Cheyenne Street and the river are going to get a sewer assessment, but their property clearly does not drain into the system. In fact, all of their property drainage enters the river directly. And I understand that some of that is the case for some of the properties along the river, that a portion of their property drains naturally into the river. And I do want to point out that we, like with other projects, it is within our special assessment policy that we discount 100 feet of river back property that is excluded from the area calculation when assessing the benefit for storm sewer. However, the property that you originally questioned, this one here, I guess I don't quite know, and I'm not sure at this point if they actually did receive an assessment. I would say the answer would be no, being that they're outside of that red boundary, but I'd have to defer that and get back to you. Again, the idea being that they would have to be in these boundaries in order to receive an assessment. So unless we go back and look through the detail and we find that this red line should have been moved over 1 or 2 lots, then I'd say that they are not receiving an assessment. So, and that again just brings up a good point that, you know, then these are preliminary. So I fully anticipate that there might be a property here and there that we didn't quite get correct. So great question though.
So with that line that's going through that you have identified as the existing storm drainage basin line, if we follow that around on the outside edge of it, so if I'm looking on the east side of Cheyenne, anything kind of to the east of that line is going to go to a different storm drainage system. Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner Anderson. And I should have probably pointed that line out during my review here. So that line is based on, for the most part, it's based on LiDAR imagery. So, you know, what we haven't been able to do, and we don't intend to do this either, because it's well beyond anything that would be expected, but we don't do a complete ground survey, a full topographical survey on the ground to identify some of these things. But we did take the opportunity to at least use some of the technology that we have available to us, which again, we were able to establish what is the drainage basin that comes into our system. Now, you'll notice that gray line doesn't necessarily match up with that red boundary. And this is where I'm going to get to more specifically the answer of your question, is that it would be very challenging if we stuck with a very, call it a jagged line approach, because there will be a future project, and some of these projects, you know, if we were to try to put the puzzle together so that we know that everyone's kind of paying for one system, that gets very challenging when you have these jagged lines. And of course, and again, if we're using LiDAR imagery, well, by the time we get to around to the next time, 2-3 years later, that imagery changes just a little bit, and all of a sudden the pieces of the puzzle aren't quite fitting. So we generally do extend beyond this. In fact, historically, we really haven't gone to this level of detail. We generally would square something off, either at a, like for example, say a First Street or some other common boundary, to be a little less detailed, because again, when we try to get detailed like this, it gets a little difficult to facilitate that through, and again, knowing that we'll have another project at some point, it just would be hard if we had all of these call it irregular shaped boundaries. So again, yes, the properties east of that red boundary are draining to a different system, and when that particular system is improved, that boundary will start there, and it will not extend, say, west of that red line to the properties that are help paying for this particular system. So does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yeah. And then, it's important, at least to keep in mind, everybody, when they're, when these other projects do come up, that we aren't, double assessing them. Basically, we're not assessing them for two projects if their property happens to straddle a line, or call it a hill or whatever. Couple questions kind of around, around this red boundary here. One is see the line go through, the one property along First, which I assume is the fire department, and then our fire station, and then over kind of towards Main Avenue between PetroServe lot and the school district. There's a group of 6 properties there that seem to fall kind of outside of the line, if you will. So kind of right in the middle there, right? The 3 green, and then the 3 that are just to the north there that are red. Those kind of seem that none of their property kind of touches that line, or that line doesn't go within that, within any of their properties. So, I understand that it's a nice, easy cutoff for, this boundary, but I want to be careful personally. If we move forward assessing these properties for this storm drainage, and then another project comes down the road and we, assess that, we need to make sure we're remembering what's going on here, if that is the case. And is this the right project to assess, to the properties? So that's kind of my concern, my questions there. Again, I just want to make sure everything is, fair once we do assess the project, and that everybody's, contributing their fair share. So
absolutely,
that's why I bring it up.
Very excellent points. And maybe just a brief specific answer to that cluster of properties that you do mention. There is also another factor here of where do we want drainage to flow? And so in that particular area, even though the LiDAR, and again, just remember that this LiDAR imagery has some fluctuation in how accurate their elevations are, but their drainage is and would be intended to benefit from this area. And so even though there might be a small portion that might shed some water somewhere else, it's really intended, when we look at the rest of our infrastructure, it's intended to come into, call it the network of pipes that ultimately will drain through the lines on Cheyenne Street. And another point to bring up in helping to answer your question or your comments is that the good thing with technology now, and why we are moving towards creating some of these benefit maps and establishing these boundaries, is that we can now keep this in GIS And we can map this so that we have, we're not just relying upon, paper records in the future to, figure out how we assess certain projects. We can keep this in our GIS system now and start to utilize this as a tool to keep track of that. And so when the next project does come forward, we can really at least start to identify, well, these properties already paid for something similar now, versus, not. But again, even that, I just want to caution some of the language being used in terms of, the properties here are going to receive a stormwater assessment, so they won't receive another stormwater assessment. And that, I just bring that up because there'll be, for example, a stormwater lift station. That'll be a stormwater assessment at some point. So, and there could be a future retention pond that the city puts in place. That could be another stormwater assessment at some point. But what I would say is, the conveyance line here, the trunk conveyance line is being assessed to this boundary. And I would imagine that when there's another trunk conveyance line, we'll have a similar effort and draw a benefiting boundary and do our best to make sure that we are consistent in who is receiving an assessment for what, so that we are avoiding a double assessment. But again, it's a little tricky when throwing around that terminology, because there are many components of the infrastructure. And so again, I just want to make sure that just because there's a storm sewer assessment here doesn't mean this is the only type of storm sewer assessment that these properties will receive. So, but again, great point on making sure that now that we've created some of these boundaries, that we continue to resource that information as we move forward and in the future with additional improvements.
Okay. So Dustin, following that line, when your water line stops a block short of Main Avenue project, they all got new water lines as part of that project, so they're not in this water line district?
It's 100% correct, Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, that yes, and that is a good segue into the water main component here, which similar to the stormwater, there's some call it uniqueness and challenges here, and the service lines being specifically one of those challenges. I'm going to go back to the utility map and highlight some of the areas that have direct service lines to the buildings. And this is why earlier I kind of made a point of that water has different benefits other than just bringing water to a building. But again, as you see here within our project itself, there's some examples of, say there's a cluster of 5 residential properties now within here. A couple of these residential properties have their service lines directly on the water main of this project. So the 3, there's 2 that are on 5th Avenue. Now 5th Avenue is getting some water main replacement. Then of course there's the one property here on Cheyenne Street with the water main or water service replacement. And then there's the 2 properties right next door that have water service off of 6th Avenue. And as you can see, I don't believe, and again, some of the information here is still needs to be verified when we're out in the field, but we're pretty sure the property furthest to the east, if you will, has a water service off of 6th and is outside of our project area. The property on the corner here on 6th and Cheyenne, we don't show a new service line into this building. Now we might start working out here and realize that their services, maybe it actually does come into where the new project water main is. But I bring this up because if we were assessing only properties that are going to get a service here, the struggle gets to be, again, these, these 3 neighbors here are getting an assessment, but these 2 neighbors are not getting an assessment, or, maybe this is the lone person here not getting an assessment, and that's, again, part of what we want to discuss. I'm not trying to say what's right or wrong here. I'm just trying to point out some of the challenges. And that's where, kind of back to Commissioner Anderson's point of, once we start drawing a boundary, adhere to that boundary in the future, so that, again, if we come in and do a 6th Avenue now in the future, even though the 6th Avenue might be the actual project where this property here gets a new water service, we may not assess them completely, or as in a similar capacity as the neighbor over here, because they would have paid for their local water main as part of the Cheyenne Street project. And that is something that we do try and stay consistent on, is that you're going to get one local assessment for a local sanitary and a local sewer, a local sanitary and a local water main. Whereas there might be some varying degrees of regional type systems and projects that come with additional assessments. But again, really trying to point out some of the challenges in conveying that we have a lot of properties in this area, and there's some right next to each other that might not be treated the same, or likely won't be treated the same. And that goes not just with the water, but it's also with the storm. And again, part of what Commissioner Anderson had pointed out, that you might have, and Commissioner Shealy also pointed out, there's parcel down here that's shaded green, but they're not, they're right next to the boundary, but they're not in. And this is exactly where it gets to be a little challenging in trying to draw these boundaries. And part of what the Century Code lays out is that, part of my responsibility as a city engineer to help establish these benefiting boundaries. And then more importantly, it's the job now of the Special Assessment Commission to review this information and then make decisions on how to allocate the benefit, which is, again, pretty much identifying these boundaries. So so again, going back to some of the other water main challenges, again, it's just a matter of, this water main, albeit is functioning more as a local water main system, there is still some, again, benefit in having fire protection, fire flow, and some of that other discussion that I pointed out earlier. So, all said, I could walk through a lot more examples on not only the water, but again, the water and storm are both predominantly that challenging utility in terms of trying to identify that benefit. But what I can show you today is the map that we've been reviewing as being what we presented with the package on December 7th with the City Commission. And I can also then show you some of these other options that More Engineering helped in creating, so that, again, we had a good discussion on. And just walking through this a little bit, this particular option here is, really focusing, and this is 100% just focusing on the water main utility, but this blue boundary here, instead of being what we show here, this blue boundary could take the shape of only properties that are having their existing service line replaced. And now you can start to see that boundary decrease, which, properties like Furniture for Less being right here, that's a bit of a unique situation in terms of, they've got a service line to the west, but I know that in recent years they've had their property for sale. I'm not sure if it currently is, but that could be a property that redevelops. And if it does redevelop, is it 1 or 2 properties? Is it 1 or 2 buildings? Is it more? Do they want service lines on Cheyenne Street? And that's kind of a similar discussion as we move down this corridor. Now, of course, like Mr. Chairman said, you know, the properties that we did exclude on the north side here, they did receive new service lines with the Main Avenue project and were assessed an actual front footage benefit for that. So we did leave them out. So again, it's just it's a boundary showing existing services being replaced. Now this particular one kind of goes to the point that I was making about, you know, again, using Furniture Plus as an example. You know, do we predetermine serviceability, meaning we can draw a line similar to this blue boundary and say, you know, these are the properties that they either are and or will tie on to the Cheyenne Street water main. The next map showing, it's somewhat similar, but it's basically saying it's even going a little larger, meaning comparing this, again, I'm going to keep using the Furniture for Less property as an example, but instead of bisecting that parcel, which again leaves call it the west side out of the assessment, it basically says the east side will, even though the service line isn't there today, they will have a service line and will utilize it the next time they need to make an improvement to that site. This is saying, you know what, let's just take all of that property and include it in, and is basically their one-time local assessment for water. Now what that will do is when we come in and construct the block to the west, they would be excluded. Again, kind of tied back to that, we would monitor and make sure that, again, we have this boundary memorialized. However, again, I'll always throw caveats in there that each district is its own district and subject to decisions and actions of that current commission body and city commission and special assessment commission alike. So we can't pre-establish anything, but that would be our intent and our goal and the best information that we'd be able to provide this commission moving forward. So again, that's another option. Here's basically the option that we show today is quite frankly, we went about roughly 150 feet on each side here to establish a more uniform boundary. However, again, as I pointed out in doing so, we, for example, include a parcel in here that technically doesn't have a service line being replaced. So,
Okay, Dustin, just again on the water lines, we're assessing them on a square foot basis, on area basis, area calculation.
Oh, great question. I'm going to go into pull up some of that information here. Yes, it is. I will say it is on a square foot basis, which again is a little less traditional. Let me find. Okay, so I'm opening up our sheet so you can see that information. So yes, both the water system and the storm sewer system are being assessed out on a square foot basis, with the sanitary sewer system being assessed out over an equivalent unit basis. Part of the reason for doing so is, again, with the irregular shapes of properties and some of these boundaries, to try to go with, say, a front foot system, which we traditionally we would with other, picture a greenfield development project where we're putting in brand new sewer, water, and streets. It's a little more of a traditional neighborhood where it's easier to identify the front footage and so on and so forth. So whereas again, in here, some of these properties are so, again, irregular shape that we felt that there would be more discrepancy or differences that wouldn't adequately reflect through using a front foot basis. And again, I'll use maybe that furniture for less parcel again. It's a big L-shaped parcel, and so for example, if we were to consider front footage there, but yet we went back to let's say we went to, say, this concept. They don't have a service line, so are they getting a front footage or not? And if they are, their front footage is quite a bit different than, say, for example, the new, the firm building that's being planned downtown, and that's what's, again, just there's some uniqueness here of trying to be somewhat consistent across not only the district, but within each of these boundaries, and the discussion changes a little bit even within each of these boundaries, which brings me up to another point. One thing that we haven't really factored in to our calculations yet, and we haven't done this on any past projects, but things like the type of development on a parcel, meaning do we treat a 6-story building different than we treat a 1-story building? Do we take a look at the use of property? Historically, we haven't, partly because uses change, and like I have mentioned repeatedly on, like, furniture for less, for example, could redevelop into something with a completely different use. And so what we do know is the information we have at this time. And so, for example, things like how impervious is the surface today? That's what's dictating some of these 2 tiers. But again, even some of that could change. So,
but our current policy, Dustin, doesn't take into fact the use of the building on water and sewer, does it? I mean, isn't that basically an area calculation?
correct. Yep, you are correct, Mr. Chairman. I bring it up because in the last couple of weeks, I've been going through this, or I should say, in the week or so before the commission meeting, when we were going through this with our consultants, that some of those points were being brought up. What if there's a new, how would you treat a block 9 development in this assessment district? If it's 10 stories high, has a lot of water use, but is on a 1-acre parcel, just like, another 1-acre parcel out here. Our current policy doesn't necessarily say we can't start doing some of that stuff, but traditionally, like I said, we haven't taken those things into consideration, but there could be some, I guess, well, maybe to say it this way, I thought it was at least worth the discussion. Do we want to do something a little different if there's a little more of a dense use on a particular parcel than not? And then it's a matter of going back and trying to figure out how would we start to draw those lines or create those tiers or divvy that out. So
Yeah, I mean, Robin and Eddie, I mean, to me, if you start getting into uses of properties as a method for assessing, how do you measure the uses? I mean, you got to have some systematic formula to assess them based on usage, and I would have no idea how we could even come up with that. I mean, the perfect example is furniture for less. What do you got? A couple of bathrooms? I mean, their use for water is really minimal, but if you're on an area calculation, it's pretty substantial. It's a big building. But that's my dilemma, is if you start assessing on something other than the parameters we've set, how do you set those? Area calculations are fairly easy. Front footage are fairly easy. Correct or not, I'm not arguing that. I just don't know how you would do it on a usage basis. But back to the two options that you've shown on the water, one is kind of just include everybody in the area on the calculation, Dustin. And the other one is to just kind of use parcels that are getting new service lines in. Is that correct, or am I interpreting that wrong?
yes, Mr. Chairman, there were basically two. You kind of summed up two different options, but one of those options we maybe have varying degrees on, and that's what you'll see here. There's titled off to the right here. There's a titled option 1, option 2, option 3. They're kind of the same with a little bit of a variation to each, but they're based more on the who's servicing from that water main either. And then what changes is between option this first one here, it's drawing a boundary based on exactly which services are tied into the current project. Whereas this next option here is we called it predetermined serviceability. So this is, and like you see underneath, anticipating redevelopment. So now we're starting to, and I don't like this one, but because we're starting to get into predetermining how a property may redevelop, but at the same time, I could defend it in terms of call it, I will establish this as a service boundary now that if and when that property does develop, they need to tie into this main line, which is not much different than when you think of, say, a planning code. When we created a downtown district some years ago, and let's pick on Choice Bank, when they wanted to do a remodel project, they had to adhere to a code that was adopted some time before. So it's similar to that. I don't, it's maybe a little apples and oranges, but again, it's all fruit. I still don't like it personally because I don't want to be stuck, with a potential future development that really is unique. And now we say, well, because we assessed out Cheyenne Street, you need to do this. So, and then there's, this option 3 here where it's not much different, but we kind of drew a little bit different boundary and just said, you're going to have a one-time local payment for this. Basically, it's the same thing. It's just we changed the boundaries. It's not much different than this previous one. You're basically anticipating future development. And at this point, we're kind of saying, look, regardless of whether or not you do redevelop, you're just going to be included in the Cheyenne Street assessment, which means you will be excluded out of the local water main, on either side of you. So it's kind of like looking at, all right, maybe it's hard to draw a boundary, but if we want to come up with a policy that says you will only get one arterial road assessment, well, then you just draw a hard boundary and say all properties within this boundary are going to get this arterial road assessment, even though you might have your driveway sitting on a different road, if that makes sense. So, and then of course we have the option that we provided in this map. So really these first few are kind of variations of the same type of concept, but with a little bit different twist. They're kind of based on the services, whereas what we've selected here is establishing more of a 150-foot boundary with the notion there that it's not just the service lines that matter here. There's also some, again, I'll say the easy to follow things are like fire coverage, some of that stuff. So, and again, with this, I would also, I would propose that, again, I'll go to this residential scenario, that this parcel, these parcels in this boundary now, again, specifically the one I'm hovering over, when we reconstruct 6th Avenue someday in the future, that they not receive at least, a local water main assessment for that project, because they're going to get a local water main assessment for this project. But again, I'm sure John would be quick to point out that I don't have that authority to dictate how a future district will be administrated. So all we can do is we can create some policy, and the assessment policy that we do have, again, is somewhat left with the ability of displaying discretion on each district. So
as part of this water project, is the main trunk line, is that right under Cheyenne Street?
yes, so there is
being replaced, right?
Correct. Yes. Yep. And there are some water mains being replaced on those side streets as well, as you can see here.
So Eddie and Robert, what I'm thinking is that, okay, you're replacing the main trunk line, so there is going to be benefit. Even if you didn't get a local line put in, you're getting your main trunk line replaced, which everybody has some benefit from replacing the main trunk line. Wouldn't you agree with that, Dustin, or wouldn't you?
Well, and yes, yep, that's where it's not a 16-inch transmission line like we have over on First Avenue that serves, that's intended to serve, it's part of our transmission system, but it is still, call it a local main line that has, again, that additional benefit of providing that fire flow, the fire protection, and also keeping the network out here in this particular area functioning at a much better, or operating better than if we had disjointed networks. And so, yeah, there is a larger benefit to me than just an individual service line that's fed off it. So,
right.
I agree. I think I like option 4 the most, with the 150-foot boundary. To me, that seems the most fair of all the 4 options, but just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was going, is that everybody's getting some benefit from this water line. And I don't think it's fair just to exclude a property who's getting some benefit because they didn't get a local line. They're certainly getting a new main line in there somewhere. So I'm kind of leaning that I thought option 4 looked pretty good to me. Robin, which any of those you like better?
I mean, as far as what I'm seeing here, option 4, I think looks good.
yeah, and so really, again, it's kind of, and forgive me if this isn't 100% matching, but this red line that I just drew here is what we, for the most part, show and have been proposing here. And so that's where you can see the properties that are in or out, if you will, based on that particular discussion. And again, this will be brought forward in a more formal capacity. I certainly want to get this feedback prior to us publishing the proposed assessments that we, again, showed within the commission packet. So as you can see, before we publish this list, this is why we wanted to get these comments. And if there was, something that you'd like to see, or that maybe you disagreed 100%, or you just wanted to throw out, something else, we can maybe try to work towards that before we publish these things. But again, I'll just reiterate that, you know, the decision-making time will come towards the end of the project, so.
Okay, so the preliminary assessments that you have drawn out are using that blue line for the,
Yes.
Okay, and then a square foot calculation within that.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman, and that's what you can see here on the spreadsheet that I just opened up. And that, again, this is where we've taken now, maybe I'll try to zoom over here. So this is where we've taken this $1.8 million that the city commission had mentioned. We divvied that out amongst the water, the sanitary, and the storm. So that's where we're getting now this $545,000. Again, this is an estimated number, but that's what we are allocating over this blue boundary. So when you look at the spreadsheet, we create these columns here. So now this water column, this water system, this $545,000, only the properties in that blue boundary are going to show up as having an assessment in here. Or at least that's what we're proposing. Now, again, so far today, I've learned that there's at least one area to double check, and that's what Commissioner Shealy pointed out. You know, why is this parcel down here green shaded but not in a boundary? I'm going to confirm some of these things, but again, even if we do have a couple things that are off, which I anticipate we probably will, those will get corrected as we go through the certification process. So,
Okay,
yes, so, great feedback.
okay, so that's the water part. The stormwater, then the green and red, that's on your map. That's the stormwater one, correct, Dustin?
The red being the storm, and now the green and light red shades.
Yep.
Again, the different tiers of storm, and then the green boundary being the sanitary sewer work. So, and maybe back to the spreadsheet, just to point that out, the sanitary sewer, $133,000 being assessed over that green boundary. The storm sewers, you know, higher. That's the we're at 1.14 of estimated cost, and so that's equating to roughly 71 cents a square foot. But again, the storm sewer is a little different in that we have, as you see here, there's a word factored storm area. So that's where if you're in this boundary, this red boundary, and your property is shaded green, your factored area is going to be based on, I'm hoping to, oops, you're getting a 50% reduction, if you will. Or not, I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. We're multiplying your area times a factor of 0.5 if you're in the green, and if you're in the light red, so a commercial property is getting a factor of 0.85.
And that's
so
because some are more permeable and some are less permeable?
Correct.
Okay. And that was based pretty much on, you looked at the property and you looked at how much impermeable area was in that. So if it's all parking lot, of course, they're going to get to 0.85. If it's a residential, they're going to get to 0.5. And
that's correct, yes. And again, that's using LiDAR imagery. I mean, it's not based on a very intensive boots on the ground collecting survey. It's based on using the technologies that we have available to us, which I believe would be more than reasonable.
Okay.
So, again, that, you know, I don't have much more to share as far as trying to go through allocating the benefit. You know, I think, again, there'll certainly be some discussions as we move forward with this job, especially as we get to the end. You know, it'll be interesting to kind of revisit this, especially once we've completed construction. And you know, it's just, again, it's a unique project, and it's there's more than one way to go about this. So.
Okay, one last question I have, Dustin, then I know Robin and Eddie probably have more. Those Main Avenue projects that are in the stormwater, again, when they did the Main Avenue project, was there some stormwater component to that, or was it's all on this project?
I appreciate that. Great question, Mr. Chairman. So when we did Main Avenue, the city levied assessments on a front foot basis for sewer and sanitary, or I'm sorry, for sanitary sewer and water main. The street and the storm sewer component were what I would call a part of the DOT's funded portion of that project. Now, you know, I don't have the dollar amounts, and I can't tell you exactly how that all shook out, but I do recall that in general, the city's responsibility from a, call it the financial part, was to completely fund the sewer water component of that project, as the funding for that was limited to the street and stormwater. So.
Yeah, I guess my concern is kind of like what Robin and Eddie said, we don't want to double assess them. You know, if they paid for it once, they shouldn't have to pay for it again.
Absolutely.
Okay. Robin, Eddie, do you guys have much or more questions on the methods that they use to calculate the preliminary assessments?
Yeah, just one, Mr. Scott. So the 0.5 and the 0.85 factoring, was that specific to this project? And I know you may have mentioned this, but just want to clarify, or is it consistent with other water sewer projects that we've had in West Fargo, that factoring?
Great question, Commissioner Shealy. Yes, it's we've done something similar with other stormwater related projects. I think this is one of the first ones that I can recall where we actually set these factors. Really, they're kind of based on some of the design factors that we consider when designing stormwater, meaning when we design a storm sewer pipe and try to size it, we generally apply a coefficient of 0.5 to a residential property, and it varies from 0.8 to 0.9 for, call it multiple family versus and commercial properties. There's a lot of different ways to do that too, and a lot of stormwater methodologies, but so I can't think of one that we did specifically like this, but we've done something similar. And if you might recall where we had a stormwater district that was certified last year, where I believe we did kind of like a 75-25 split, but that was a little more based on regional and local benefiting areas. This was on the north side of town. So again, stormwater has commonly been looked at from a tiered approach, you know, whether it's been kind of a local or versus regional type tiered approach, or you know, trying to identify heavy users like this. But I can't think of one where we did it exactly the same, where we used 0.85 and 0.5 specifically. So that is a first that I can recall.
With regards to sanitary sewer, I know we've mentioned that we're looking at it based on an equivalent unit basis. Can you just briefly talk about kind of what that portion of the project looks like? So, you know, why other properties, you know, might be benefiting from that portion?
Absolutely, Commissioner Anderson. So again, the sewer boundary being pretty much everything west of Cheyenne Street. And I don't have probably a good map right off the top here to show, aside from, I can certainly show on the screen some of the sewer work that is being done. But predominantly the service area of the sanitary system, and maybe I could try to pull up our city utility map. But one way to maybe thinking of it like this: the sanitary work that is being done is not what I would consider it's not the local stuff. It's not the local line that is right out in front of a property or a building. So whereas the water main is a little bit of that, and here the sanitary sewer work that we are doing with this project is more of a conveyance line that is taking sewage over to, say, a pumping station or a lift station. And so without this improvement, if say, let's just say this particular sanitary work that we're doing, if it were to fail, and I was asked to draw a boundary along or around the homes or properties that would be affected by that failure, this is the boundary that I would draw. But again, these properties aren't the properties that they're not tied into this line with their services. That is a local line in front of their house. This is the line that these lines are technically, call it part of the system that enables these properties to, I guess, drain into the lift stations that are near or around this area. So again, I think the best way to say this would be if we had a failure on the portion of work that we're doing relating to sanitary sewer, if we had a failure and as part of the emergency cleanup, I was asked to draw a boundary along all impacted properties, this green boundary is what I would draw.
Okay.
And so the cost, if I remember right, was around $700 some dollars per equivalent unit, $725. And just as a refresher, an equivalent unit in general is taken to be 10,000 square feet. So if there's a property out here that has 1 acre, that would equate roughly into 4.5 equivalent units for that particular property. Generally, we treat single family residential as getting 1 equivalent unit. But again, I just want to give that baseline of an equivalent unit was established to, again, and is also in our assessment policy as being 10,000 square feet. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dustin, so kind of to summarize the preliminary assessments that you've kind of prepared that you're going to publish. And again, these are just preliminaries, they're not anything else. We're using the blue line for the assessment for the water. And then we're using the sanitary, the red line, and again, on a square footage basis. And then the stormwater is on that area, but based on that factor, whether it's permeable or not permeable or more or less permeable. And that's the assessments that you've calculated so far.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Eddie or Robin, is there any changes to that methodology that you would propose?
As far as methodology, I don't have anything. I just looked at the December 7th commission agenda where it has all the spreadsheets. I looked at that parcel that Eddie pointed out. That was on the list. So down that lower right corner, just north of 7th there, that's on the list with it. So you just want to double check that one, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Will do.
Well, then there's also that peninsula or the Oxbow off of 7th. Is that included? I mean, again, the red line it's outside the red line, Dustin, is all I'm saying.
Yep, and that one, I intentionally did not include it within the red line. I intentionally drew the red line where you see it.
Okay,
Meaning,
so it shouldn't be green then.
Oh, yes, great point. Yes, it should not be shaded green. If anything, that shading should be turned off. Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
It should be within the green boundary line, but it should not be shaded green. And that's another thing that we
Okay.
will certainly check.
that sounds good. Okay, Dustin, is there anything else? I mean, it appears that the commission is okay with calculations you've done for the preliminary assessments if you publish them. And again, we won't take any formal action because there's no formal action to take. John, you got anything else if you're still on?
I'm still on. I've been listening. No, I don't have anything additional today.
Okay. Jim, Pina, or Dustin, anything else you want from the assessment commission?
I don't have anything. Thank you.
Okay, then I guess we will stand adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
Merry Christmas.
You, everyone, have a Merry Christmas.